He is the Chosen One. You must see it.
I gave Qui-Gon my word.
Is it the Chosen One?
He is.
And it is the Jedi who will stand in the way of peace.
The first galactic empire!
It's not whether or not we fight.
It's how we choose to fight that matters.
I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
The Force will be with you, always.
And I will not be the last Jedi.
You are listening to The World Between Worlds, a Star Wars podcast where we have been marathoning all of Star Wars and lead up to the rise of Skywalker. Today, we are talking about 3 standalone Star Wars Rebels episodes, all, I would say, are pretty different, all focus on different characters, and all focus on different sides of the Star Wars world and Star Wars lore that I think are really exciting, and we're very excitedly told here. My name is Yates.
And I regret to inform you that my name is Keats, because normally I'm the 4th person, but today I'm the 2nd.
Yes, today it's just me, Yates, and my brother Keats.
And the reason being, we are preparing for a hurricane.
Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff going on that prevented Jordan and Jessica from being here, but in addition, we also live on the East Coast, and there is a storm that is coming at the time of recording this. By the time it's up, probably the storm will be long over. Keats, you and I haven't done an episode alone. I think we've only done it once, and there was one episode where it was just me and Jordan.
We did the episode together that covered, it was like episode 12 or something. It's like Grievous gets a little bit of backstory, and then we did the Deserter, which is the Captain Rex really good
Love
Dog
that
Soldiers episode.
Dog Soldiers, and what else?
I think it
was
Lightsaber
Lost, which I've been actually having the hankering to rewatch.
Yeah, that was a great one.
Yeah, that was really good.
You know what's similar about that episode that we recorded and then this episode?
What?
All 3 have nothing to do with each other, and they're just kind of like little tales about what's happening in the Star Wars timeline right now.
Okay, so we are talking about the Antilles Extraction, Hera's Heroes, and The Last Battle from Season 3. The Antilles Extraction begins with a rebel mission gone wrong. They are down a couple rebel starfighters and a couple rebel pilots. And coincidentally, at the same time, a new Fulcrum agent, oh my gosh, who could it be? Ahsoka's not in the picture anymore. There are pilots in a Imperial Starfighter Academy called Sky Strike. Is that the name of it? I'm pretty sure it is.
I don't remember at all.
I think it's Sky Strike Academy, that are pilots that are looking to defect to the Rebel Alliance. And Sabine is sent to go help these pilots out. And who would it be but original trilogy background character, the best background character, Wedge Antilles.
Commander Sato, allow me to present Lieutenants Wedge Antilles and Hobby, formerly of the Galactic Empire.
Commander, we heard you're looking for some good pilots.
Indeed we are. Welcome to the rebellion.
Both of us really liked this episode. It has a lot of good qualities going for it. It is very straightforward. It is very much, it is sort of action-oriented, but it also helps build out the world, and we get to see a little bit into new characters. New character to the show, and new character to us marathoning it in chronological order is old school fan fave, Wedge Antilles. This is kind of like a backdoor origin story for this character, which I thought was a fun use of this Rebels episode as just a kind of like, it feels very incidental and not like an origin story. It's just kind of like a, hey, this is happening.
Well, I think the coolest part about it is that like Wedge isn't a character that anybody who's a casual fan really knows. So, because he like had a lot of history in the books and stuff, but he never had, and he had like a few lines of dialogue. So the fact that they're using the Rebels TV show as a means to kind of introduce the fandom to this unfamiliar thing for the casual audience, I think is really, really generous idea.
Cool, yeah. I definitely agree. I will say, growing up, I did kind of have an affection for Wedge, but mainly because he's one of the only...
Because he sounds like the innocent one in the red group.
Look at the size of that thing.
Look at the size of that thing.
Yeah, he does have a cute voice, but that aside, he is he's like the one background character that makes it through all 3 movies. He's in all 3.
It's true.
As a kid, I remember him being just the guy that's always there. Like, I was like, oh, it's the guy, he's back. And I always like kind of had an affection for him that way. I feel like that's the reason why he, out of all the sort of random X-Wing fighter characters, like...
Also, some fun facts about actor who played Wedge. He's the uncle of Ewan McGregor, who plays Obi-Wan Kenobi.
This is true.
Uncle Dennis.
Wedge went on to have like a pretty successful career as like an expanded universe character. I think he became like an admiral or something at one point. He was like just the main rebel guy that rose through the ranks.
He was in all the Rogue Squadron video games.
Yes, Rogue Squadron, the X-Wing books, but he hasn't, outside of Rebels, he really hasn't been fleshed out too much. He has a role in the Aftermath books, and that's really it. So Wedge is kind of more of a blank slate now, but we get a fun introduction to him here.
Yeah, Sabine and Wedge are on a mission, and once it starts, we don't know who the character is yet, but as soon as he's like, call me Wedge, and she's like, call me Sabine, and then immediately it's like, don't break protocol. So we can already tell that Wedge is kind of like a thorn in the Imperial side at this point. He's not very comfortable where he is. So that whole introduction works very well.
Yeah, and I think Sabine lands and like she doesn't know who the rebels are in the academy. We don't see like too much crazy like abusive shit going on, but there is shortly afterwards a sequence in sort of like a training lab where they go on like a simulated mission and they're asked to basically kill unarmed civilians, which is actually how the intro starts for the episode.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but I felt pretty tricked by that. I didn't realize it was a simulation at first. I thought they were on an actual mission. I was just like, oh my god, like the ghost just blew up Sabine. That's effing crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But in reality, it was just a simulation the whole time. So I thought that was a cool little switcheroo.
And I like that like they're using the ghost like for training at school. Like it's like.
Yeah, it has a reputation at this point.
Yeah, I thought that little bit was cool. So shortly after that, what really convinces Sabine and Wedge to like move forward is that Sabine just sort of prods and asks a bit about what's driving Wedge, and Wedge talks about where he was before this.
Look, I want to do my part for the Empire, but firing on unarmed ships wasn't what I had in mind. What about you?
I was flying cargo ships when the Empire recruited me. At the time, I figured, why not? Seemed a whole lot more exciting than hauling spare parts around the galaxy. But if this is what the Empire's becoming, I don't know.
You ever think about getting out?
That's not really possible, is it?
He talks about a few things here and there that shows you what kind of person he was and what kind of person he is, like how he feels about the Empire, what he thinks about the current political state of things. He doesn't see the Empire as this necessarily force of evil, which I think that is something we don't really get to see.
We even talked about just a few episodes ago, like these new stories are trying to like show new sides of like the Empire, new sides of the rebellion that we haven't seen before that can potentially like grow out and show more like gray sides of each of the two opposing sides in Star Wars. But we really don't ever see the Empire, someone who's like more of a fan of the Empire more casually. I feel like, and Jessica in particular stressed this, but I feel like this is the closest we've gotten where he was just like, yeah, like I was just a worker. The Empire found me. It sounded like a good like opportunity for me. Like I have no gripes about it. But then he seems very genuinely disturbed, like now that he's there, that it's just a lot different than he assumed it was. So, and I guess that makes sense. Like, why would the Empire, like, the sides of the Empire that the public, the average person gets to see, it's propaganda. You know, it's like, why would Wedge assume that, like, he's going to go train for this new job where he's just going to be, like, killing civilians? That's not what he thought it was going to be. It's just like, oh, like, I'll get to be a pilot. That's cool. I think it's also like for like the writing. So this is also, we haven't even mentioned it yet. This is a Sabine-centric episode. At least like she's like the hero pushing you through the story.
Right.
I remember this being the first episode, like watching it when I was watching it the first time. Like, oh, I like Sabine now. Like, there's just a slight bit more edge to her in a good way, not in like a sort of like, I guess, pandery way or anything. She just feels like, I'm a soldier. I'm about business here. But compared to her previous episode with Ketsu, like that was an okay episode, and it was sort of like a serialized little bottle thing. but Sabine's identity didn't really like play into the story, where it was like kind of the subtext here, like Sabine is going back to an Imperial Academy,
right? That's
where she was like almost became, a bad person.
Right, that's what I want to say. It's like both of those episodes have the same thing in common, which is that they relate to something in Sabine's past. Mm-hmm. The only difference is that here it actually has something to say. Yeah. The Ketsu episode doesn't really say anything about who she was before. Mm-hmm. It's more about who she is now, but we already know who she is now. Mm-hmm. So here it's like exploring like what this Imperial attitude is like that we don't get to see very much. Mm-hmm. So it shows us a whole new side to what Sabine was probably like.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And she's like also good at it. Like she's here and like she like knows how to navigate the system because it's like how she spent her young adult years. But also, thinking about it now, there's we see a different side of her in that in this mission, like her job is really kind of to be like empathetic and like more sort of like the negotiator diplomat in a way, because like Hera sends her on the mission because like she assumes that obviously like Sabine's going to be able to handle herself. This is an Imperial Academy. She's been in an Imperial Academy before, but also like she has to like create this relationship with Wedge, which is normally a situation we never put her in. We even talked about it I think pretty recently, where we were just like, all Sabine does is like battle dialogue, blow stuff up and battle dialogue, and here she's asked to put herself out there a bit more. Mm-hmm. And when she does do action, it's great.
No, wait! It's me. I'm the rebel.
Sabine, don't!
And now we have a name.
Thanks.
Blast it. Sorry.
Do you think it was at all hard for her to do this, or do you think she has sort of like nerves of steel?
The mission?
Yeah, like sort of just going back to this place that like tried to radicalize you and make you a Nazi, but when you say it, it sounds like I don't want to do this mission, but she's like pretty gung ho to go do it and save these kids.
There are reasons that they explain in season 4 that I can't go into about why I would say yes. She's probably like experiencing some post-traumatic stuff, but for right now, in the context of the narrative, we don't know who she is yet. So in the moment of the episode, I would say she's probably got close to something of nerves of steel, but
yeah, she seems pretty determined and not fazed by this mission.
Not to get too off track here, and I feel like I'll probably get a lot of flack for this, but I totally ship Sabine with Wedge way, way, way much over Sabine and Ezra.
Interesting. Okay, I
was watching this with my girlfriend the first time, and she was just like squeezing my hand anytime they had a scene together. And I was just like, I totally feel you.
You know what? I kind of like them. I like them together more too. Also, there's kind of like a weird age gap with Ezra and Sabine, so I don't like that aspect of that.
That's that too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not. I think you get the impression Wedge and Sabine are like roughly the same age. But yeah, I like that Wedge is even kind of like more sort of like hapless than Ezra, and like
like Wedge is the one who's more irresponsible and is constantly getting caught, and Sabine's the one who has to save him, like the role reversal of the damsel in distress.
Yeah, that. And I guess Wedge is maybe kind of like geeky. Like I think like Ezra thinks he's like really cool, but like Wedge doesn't like at all.
Yeah, Ezra's like, I watch Stranger Things. I'm a nerd. And then Wedge,
you want to watch Stranger Things with me, Sabine?
And then Wedge is like, I'm a level 3 Garthon.
Yeah, thinking about it now, I do really like this. This is a good. You know what? Official. These 3 episodes felt, and I think this one the most because the other 2 kind of connect back to the main story, but this one the most felt like super serialized in the way that Clone Wars was, and then also some of the episodes in season 2. But I feel like it's operating at the same level as some of those serialized season 2 episodes are. But I think this is just doing a way better job and just showing us something that's interesting and doesn't feel derivative.
Right, and that kind of goes into something that I bring up a lot, which is just, it's like all like on the writers to really like make the story. And one of the writers in this episode is Gary Whitta, who's has done some other work in Star Wars before. He did a lot of writing for the Walking Dead Telltale video game, which is one of my favorite stories of all time.
It's Keats' favorite thing ever.
And so the fact that he works in Star Wars Rebels, I feel like it feels very natural for him. And I think the writing just really shows in this, like the difference between like where we are now and where we were in season 2, where everything kind of just felt monotonous and mundane.
Yeah.
I feel like it all has to do with like the familiarity or just like the balance between the familiarity as well as the new fresh territory. Because it's like we know who Sabine is at this point, and so using her as like a surrogate character to introduce the character of Wedge, who's another character that we know but don't know about. So we never like feel out of place in the story. We just kind of feel like this is something new that we get to witness.
So we talked about pretty much everything. The only other big thing I would say is that Governor Price and Callus show up halfway through the episode. And Callus was in last week's episode too, but had like 2 lines. And this is the most we see of him. And in fact, he lets the rebels go and helps them out.
Avoid levels 3 through 5. Hangar 24 is your best possibility.
Wait! Why should we trust you?
Tell Garazeb Aurelius we're even. Go!
Yeah, it's definitely a really great moment, and yeah, I got pretty emotional. I was just like, yeah, I fucking love this dude.
Yeah, tears were welling up in my eyes.
Yeah, and it also like does this really cool thing of like he gets like shit on like throughout the episode. Everyone's like, oh, Callus over here, the idiot says we should do this, and then like, why should I believe you? You're an idiot and you're a bad guy. And like he doesn't like argue with them. He just like absorbs it. He takes it. But just like even the last season or the season before, like that's just sort of like the status quo where it'd be like, oh, having those offhand comments all the time. But now with this new emotional context, we can have those same moments, and there's like this like torture of like going through them. And yeah, I thought that was great.
Yeah, and you even like notice in the episode too that he's acting differently. Like he's in the room with Sabine, not acknowledging that he knows who the rebel defector is. When Price is asking, which one of you is the rebels? And he's just kind of standing there patiently waiting for them to leave the room.
It like changes the dynamic of the show. Like just with like one of the main villains now, like we don't know exactly what he's thinking anymore. Someone who we took as kind of like an absolute through the first 2 seasons, and now you can just throw him in just as like a character that has like 4 or 5 lines in this episode, but now just like whenever he says something, we're like really analyzing it. It was a good idea to use him in this episode that's so focused on like the Imperial indoctrination aspect of it, which I thought was cool. Hera's heroes. We return to Ryloth. Pressure is growing in the system, and Cham notes that the normal Imperial lackey that he's been coming up against has gotten a little smarter, and it's very out of character for him. That's because that dude is weak. They brought in the strong boy. It's Grand Admiral Thrawn. The Syndulla family home has been taken and has been made Thrawn's headquarters, at least on the planet, and with it, Hera's family heirloom, the Cala Quarry.
I'm afraid I couldn't save anything when I escaped.
Not even the Cala Quarry?
What's a Cala Quarry?
A totem passed down the line of a Twi'lek family. It honors all who have come before.
Each parent adds to the artwork to include themselves in the legacy.
Family history is living art.
Hera would have inherited our family's Cala Quarry.
And I still will. That heirloom was important to my mother, and I'm not ready to give it up yet.
The whole key to this episode is this item, the Cala Quarry, which I believe is a brand new invention, but it's part of the Twi'lek culture, and I think it's really cool. I like it a lot, and it's obviously, to get another character in and involved in the plot here. But basically, it's just sort of like a cultural artifact that has survived generations and generations up through the Syndulla family and through presumably all the Twi'lek families. I've talked a couple times about how like the Twi'leks are just like the people that get enslaved, and like that's all there is to them, at least as far as we've seen so far in the show. But this little item is our first look into there's more to their culture than that, and I found it to be a very cool way into the character, and the fact that Hera cares so much about it makes me care about it a lot more too.
Yeah, I love the Cala Quarry. It was like one of my favorite contributions that Rebels has added to the canon. Unlike Thrawn, I just like love little historical landmarks and monuments. Anything that the size of it is something I can hold in my hand so I can look online to see if they make replicas of it and buy it and then decorate it with my room. So
Hera's worried. The whole thing is she's worried about losing this item that means so much to her family, and she goes out of her way to go get it. She asks the Ghost crew to stay out of it, but they're like, come on, don't be serious. We're going to help you if this is that important to you. So she's afraid of losing it. And thinking about it, like, most of her people have probably lost theirs. Like, Aayla Secura, does she still have her Cala Quarry? Like, I'm just thinking of like, okay, so the first Twi'lek we ever see is like the slave in Jabba's palace. Like, that girl doesn't have her Cala Quarry anymore. If the Twi'leks are like so disenfranchised, have been so colonized by like the Republic, or even like crime systems like the Hutt family or stuff like that, where just they're constantly being separated from their land and like being moved around and like slave traded across the galaxy. In that sense, it kind of makes sense that the Cala Quarry exists, almost like as if it was a reaction to that. Like if your family has been so split apart that there's still a Cala Quarry still exists. That's like a record of like your family and like your family's life, even though like maybe like the actual records of like people have been moved across the galaxy so much and
that's definitely a cool idea. I don't know if that's official or if that's anything to go off of that, but I like that idea a lot. When they brought up the Cala Quarry and introduced it, I was thinking a lot about just other forms of like family trees and stuff. Like I was thinking about like the actual family tree in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, where we get to see Sirius Black's like his wallpaper is his family tree.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a lot of themes of family in Star Wars already. So the fact that we get a very literal, physical idea of family in the episode is just a very novel concept.
Yeah, it was very cool, and like, I guess it kind of looks like a tree, but it also kind of looks like the dangling parts are kind of like, it looks like Leku, like it's supposed to maybe look like a Twi'lek.
Oh, that's true.
Well, the Cala Quarry looks cool. I mean, it's a cool little design. Awesome. It's made of little wood blocks, but like you can hold it and it moves and like the weight shifts in it. It's also like the engravings on it like are presumably in like an alien language we can't understand. So like,
I thought it was more decor. I thought it was more like the idea was that you installed your own block and then you got to paint it or do whatever you wanted to it.
Yeah,
so it leaves your mark on it.
Thrawn has a really great line where he describes like how valuable it is.
Do you know what this is?
Some primitive native trinket.
It's a Cala Quarry, a revered Twi'lek heirloom passed from parent to child through generations. Worthless to outsiders, priceless to family.
Yes, well, she stole it.
Yes, but why?
So Thrawn.
Yeah, there he is. He's back.
Yeah, he gets definitely more of a showcase in here. We find out more of what he's about. He was used a bit curiously in the previous group of episodes where he didn't really say or do much other than sort of throw his weight around in the war room. But here, he's definitely fleshed out more. And the Cala Quarry is really what brings him into the story. Hera's drawn there by this piece of art. That's the reason she's there. And Thrawn, is a person that loves and respects art and, has like a very analytical mind. So
Thrawn Treason has just come out and we're meeting Thrawn right now in the story. So I figured it'd be pretty cool for me to just like kind of catch up on what I forgot about the Thrawn books. Cause right now I've read Thrawn and Thrawn Alliances and I'm about 7 chapters into Thrawn Treason right now. And minor spoilers here for the Thrawn books. There's a main narrative that goes on, but I'm kind of just going to talk about where he comes from and how he gets into the Empire. But if you want to read the books, definitely go read the books because they're really, really good.
He's a man with his own motivations and his own philosophy.
They never really mention it in the show at all, but his species, the Chiss, in this point in time, they're also at war.
In the unknown regions, like outside of the Republic, like or the Empire, like they exist outside of the control of Palpatine and like the Star Wars universe as we know it.
Right, exactly. And so the entire reason why he's in the Empire right now is because they sent him to kind of like take field notes and investigate the Empire to see if they would be an asset or an enemy in their conflict. He was originally just supposed to like go there and come back, but then they actually asked him if he wanted to join the Empire and assist with them, and he made a deal with the Emperor. He was like, I'll come out and help you, but you have to promise that you won't attack our people in your grand scheme of taking over the universe. There's like this whole like polarizing opinion that you can have about Thrawn. It's either like you love him or you hate him. It's because he's really, really good at his job, but people like don't think he deserves promotions because he's an alien. And so once he reaches the rank of Grand Admiral, that's kind of where we see him at this point.
So Thrawn very quickly discerns Hera's identity, and that's sort of his biggest gotcha moment in the episode, where he's the other, I don't remember the name that they gave the Imperial officer. He's just like... Slavin? Okay. And Slavin
I remember because I thought that was a crazy-ass name.
He has like no idea what's going on, and Thrawn, meanwhile, is like, duh, this is Hera. She's standing right in front of her family portrait. And he also like beats Ezra. Ezra's like about to take Thrawn out, but Thrawn already knows that Ezra is the person in disguise.
That's the great thing about Thrawn, is that he always knows what's coming next, and so you always are aware he knows what's coming next, so you get to like see him have a discussion with somebody.
Yeah, the great part is like
he's like a character out of Inglourious Bastards or something.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like knowing that it's drawn out, and because you know how movies work, you kind of know the direction that the scene's heading in.
Yeah.
But what makes it fun and the drama of it is the dynamic between Thrawn and Hera.
It is a pity our first encounter might, well, be our last. I will keep your Cala Quarry in a place of honor.
If I knew you'd take it, I would have smashed it when I had the chance.
You surprise me. Is your history worth so little to you?
My family legacy belongs to us alone. It is not for some collector's curiosity.
What did you say?
Forgive him. I thank you for your hospitality.
I think that's what made all the scenes work, and what made this episode really fun for me was the sequences where the two of them are trying to sort of like figure each other out. And there's plenty of times where we watched Rebels or Clone Wars where we've figured out the next 5 minutes like before it's happened. And Thrawn seems to be a character that is at that same position as the audience, where like, oh, we've seen enough stories like this, like I know how this is going to play out, and I'm going to sort of twist this and use this to my advantage because I know the Rebels' modus operandi. And so I think in that regard,
that about Thrawn.
Yeah, and I think in that regard, it is a pretty effective here, and I think it's especially effective after the first 2 seasons were kind of like sparse in the villain department. The Grand Inquisitor, I think, was the most effective villain, but, you know, he was scaled appropriately to where the Rebels, like, outgrew him and took care of him by the end of the first season. And then Vader is there in the second season, but he's kind of more sort of fades in the background. In fact, me and Jordan were also complaining in one of the episodes that, like, you reach a certain point where, like, we're supposed to feel like Vader is still a threat, like this far into season 2, but we haven't seen him in so long, or they haven't mentioned him directly in so long, that you don't really get that feeling where you get at a point in season 1 where the Grand Inquisitor keeps showing up and is starting to figure out how the Rebels operate, and Thrawn is doing that here where he's sort of sinking his teeth into the Rebels. It's good to have a villain now in the show that is smart and that can consistently enter the battle arena, and we can get some nice stalemates that don't feel cheap. Because at the end of the day, I don't think the ending with Thrawn letting them get away feels cheap, in my opinion. It just feels like part of the story, which I'm sure some people who would complain
I think that's
would say that it's
controversial.
cheap. Yeah.
Like, I don't think there's like I think there'll be a lot of people who would agree, but there's also a lot more people who would probably say, it feels like it's very much a transparent writer's thing of just like, we gotta segue into the next episode somehow.
Yeah.
And I kind of fall into that camp. And that's something that stood out to me about Thrawn in this episode. After catching up on all of it as of right now, and this is gonna naturally happen, but I feel like Thrawn in the novels and Thrawn in Rebels are like pretty different in like a pretty dramatic way. Like in this, he looks like kind of like the evil guy in the room. He's like a force of nature. He doesn't look like he'd be willing to compromise on anything, but in the novels, he's actually like not a sweet guy, but he's very like, in this episode, for example, he like lets the rebels go because he thinks that they earned their victory, but they never really explain like any of the tactical reasons why. He just says that it was an enlightening situation. So that's kind of like up for subjectivity in terms of like what the reason was why he let them go. And that's something that like, just based on the show alone, I don't think I could tell you why he let them escape, other than like literally like, oh yeah, I learned a lot from this. But having read the books, the answer lies within the books, and they don't really explore any of like his personal motivation in the show that much. The reason why he chose to let them go is just because he doesn't really think about what's best for the Empire all the time. He only thinks about what's best for the Empire when it happens to coincidentally be like what would be good for him, not himself necessarily. He's not a selfish character, but capturing the rebels isn't really going to do much. Like, yeah, he even says in the episode, like that they won their victory. And before that, preceding that, he says, let's see how Hera will react to this situation. He was anticipating her to do something problematic. He was either hoping that the Empire would either win and just kind of get Cham Syndulla for their own good, or he was testing her to see how much of an opposition Hera would be to him. So this was more of just like less of an actual operation, and it was more of a test for him to understand more personally what kind of threat the rebels were.
From the limited amount we got from the show, I definitely feel like the whole thing is like a test, and he's just sort of like, you know, like a computer, just like gathering information and waiting. Though the way you're describing it, though, I guess it is kind of interesting because the episode does kind of draw attention to this. That, you know, the story of Ryloth is a story of like occupation by, you know, a larger imperialist force. And Hera's people have been occupied for a very long time. And at the same time, the whole idea of Thrawn, it's kind of like the reverse of that, where Thrawn is like this plant in the Empire by this whole other group that we haven't seen in the show, the rest of Thrawn's people. He is working for his own benefit, but he's also like a huge asset to the Empire, just in terms of how effective he is. And like, though obviously Palpatine probably understands like that Thrawn is a person that's sort of motivated by his own desires. Obviously Palpatine has brought him into the fold because he knows that Thrawn is going to do things for Palpatine that are going to benefit Palpatine. So that whole dynamic is interesting. And then there's this scene where Thrawn just says like, hey, so we're occupying your planet. How do you feel about that?
I'm a visitor to your world. It occurs to me it might be beneficial to hear what you have to say about our Imperial Occupation.
I don't think I could be of any help to you.
No, I disagree.
That scene was interesting to me. She doesn't really answer his question. She kind of ignores it. But thinking about it now, like that whole element of like, oh, like, yeah, Palpatine would do this to my planet if it was beneficial to him. That whole bit of it is really interesting to me because Thrawn is an outsider too.
Something I was just thinking about in the show, which I wasn't sure if you necessarily got the chance to think about because you weren't as versed in the books. I know you read the comic adaptation.
I did, and I very much liked it.
Thrawn's freak out, I liked how it was like a build-up. Like there was so much tension there, and then like he finally released it as soon as like Hera was like behind a closed door.
Have the Cala Quarry transported to my ship.
We should just destroy that piece of Twi'lek trash.
And I feel like the reason why he freaked out was just because he kept like, every time that Commander would like speak out, Thrawn was just thinking about the giant threat that the Chiss are fighting back home.
That's interesting.
All my people are suffering back where I'm coming from. This guy just won't shut up about how this girl is useless. Like in the thought process of like, he values Hera, he like values her culture. We know that. So maybe he's like looking at potential like wherever he goes, he's like kind of like getting his eyes like on the idea of recruiting people. So I think maybe he's like looking at Hera and like he says, like, you grow up in the Clone War, all you've ever known is war. Maybe he's like trying to like pick apart her background so he can like think like maybe their species would be a good asset for the war I'm fighting back home.
That's definitely interesting because that's something I wasn't really thinking about at all during that scene. I think Captain Slavin, he seems to be like the most like racist, speciest of the Imperial characters we've seen so far.
I think they needed someone to play it up because Thrawn was being so respectful. They're like, we need someone to like be extremely not respectful.
Yeah, he was just like he calls Hera like primitive, like he's like, and that's like, I don't think we've seen anyone really go that far at any point. But yeah, the guy goes really far, and so definitely the amount of disrespect that Hera is shown, and also just like us as the audience, like we don't like that guy, so it's also just like really rewarding when Thrawn is just like, yeah, don't pay attention to that guy, like I know he sucks too, like I'm just like here to have a conversation with you.
Overall, I think Thrawn's characterization in this episode was very well done. I don't think it really did a lot to establish where he is in the Empire or like what he wants. I think that's the biggest problem, is that they don't really know like what to tell the audience in terms of where Thrawn is supposed to be going, because they don't want to reveal his whole plan yet. But I feel like we don't have any kind of idea to go off of, so he's kind of just like an observer at this point, and he hasn't really done anything of significance, even in this episode.
How would you compare that to like what they do with Vader or Maul though, either? Because Vader, I feel like we're kind of like grasping at straws in terms of what he wants, other than to like take out the Jedi. And then Maul we've only sort of just now started to understand like where emotionally he's coming from, which is kind of like what Jessica was not happy with previously.
Well, with Maul, it's like the obvious answer is he's there for vengeance. He's there for revenge. He has like a personal stake in what he's trying to get accomplished. Vader, it's not even a question of what he's trying to do. It's just kind of, it's almost like it's more about what the Emperor wants, because he's just a servant to the Emperor.
Okay, that's a good point.
So he doesn't even necessarily have his own personal motivation to anything, or a plan to anything. It's just a matter of what the Emperor is going to command him to do next. So I think Vader kind of gets a pass in that regard. But Thrawn is kind of like in charge of his own missions, so we should understand like what his mission agenda is supposed to be.
Yeah, I would say then the impression that we get is Thrawn is kind of like a career military man. So yeah, there isn't as much nuance as you are inferring from the books. Mm-hmm. There isn't that amount of nuance to a viewer that's just watching the show like myself.
Yeah, let me emphasize that. There is so much nuance in the books. Like, every time he has a mission, it's just like he's always just doing random shit that nobody understands. And then, like, it all comes together in the end. And then all of, like, the employees are just like, holy fuck, this guy's a fucking mastermind. And I want to see that in the show more, because I feel like we haven't gotten that yet. And I was hyped for this episode because I was like, finally we get, like, more Thrawn, more like, holy shit, this guy's a mastermind. But we don't get to see that yet.
So Hera's whole thing is she's drawn to this object. And as Thrawn had stated, like, as an outsider, like, we don't understand how significant it is. But definitely in the episode, it's like, it's interesting that Hera is going, at so many other points throughout the series, she's, like, very pragmatic, but she is going to, like, risk it all to get this item. And I'm like, okay, that's an interesting choice for her character. Like, again, Thrawn even says, like, maybe, an outsider wouldn't understand, so maybe I don't understand why it's so important to risk her life for. But it ends up being the case in the episode that the way that Hera wins is sort of just like setting the Cala Quarry aside and saying like, okay, I don't need to have this because I still have my family, Yeah,
it reminded me of something so specific. I'm trying to remember what it was.
Thor?
Oh, yeah.
The damage is not too bad. As long as the foundations are still strong, we can rebuild this place. Those foundations are gone. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, that's like a recurring thing in films, just like letting something physical about their past behind to just like kind of take in like what's metaphorically present.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about it. It's kind of pretty similar to like Zeb's other episode where he just has to say like, okay, like I understand the past is the past now. Like I forgive you, Callus. Like, and even Sabine, like they have to reckon with some sort of symbol from their past. And Hera, her whole journey has been kind of interesting. I feel like it's definitely different from the other characters. It was like a slower crawl to get to this moment where she has to be like, okay, like.
Well, it's interesting because she has a role in the rebellion and in the Ghost Crew. She kind of has like an established role. So her story from her perspective is kind of like not over, but it doesn't really have anywhere to go next except for like what happens to stumble by her. So like, oh, something's happening to my family, so I have to go there now. It's never like, oh, I need to change who I am. It's always just like something that she's reacting to.
Right, like her identity is set already.
Yeah,
like, in her mind.
Right, where Sabine is a character who is still like trying to figure things out. She still has conflicts with her past.
And so is Zeb, but I feel like Zeb's at the point now where he's also like just finally sort of like solidified.
Right.
And that's kind of what, I mean, it's like a growing up story for all these characters. And Hera, you know, is the mom of the family. So like, and she's always been the one that's had it figured out. In the last battle, Kanan, Ezra, Captain Rex are checking out an old separatist space station that is crashed on some barren wasteland planet. They're just going to do some basic recons, try and find some weapons that they can use and bring back into the rebellion. But guess what? Battle droids galore on this old separatist ship. They are still active, and they are led by a super tactical droid that wants to end the Clone Wars on his own terms.
The Jedi betrayal ended the war for most of the galaxy, but here on Agamar, I assumed it was a Republic trick and prevented the shut-down command.
Well, it doesn't matter how it ended. The war is over. Let us go!
Negative, Captain. I calculate that this will be my only opportunity to end the Clone Wars as I planned, with a victory for the Separatist Alliance.
What do you want us to do? Surrender?
On the contrary, I want you to fight.
So this is a great, fun little episode that also just is kind of like a little smaller story, but obviously has huge significance in that it connects back to the Clone Wars pretty directly and sort of explores the leftover tension and unresolved issues that exist between the droids and the clones.
Yeah, it definitely feels like this episode was specifically designed to cater towards the Clone Wars audience. Like, that's not really a secret whatsoever.
Yeah, absolutely not.
But it's really...
Especially with a little ending thing at the end.
Oh, yeah, definitely. But it's also, like, really well told to the point where you could be the Ezra character who's kind of just, like, thrown in and tossed in the middle to be like, oh, I'm kind of a bystander like with these two characters who are at war with each other still, even though the war is over. It's just like a really cool... I feel like they introduced Rex and they didn't do too much with him.
Like, this felt like the payoff for including Rex. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, Rex's introduction to Rebels was like some of my favorite stuff so far. And
yeah,
I thought it was really
good.
well done. But then everything thereafter kind of felt lackluster.
Yeah,
like
he was just a guy. Like
he was a contractor. He was a consultant for the rebellion.
It kind of felt a bit like a mischaracterization to me, but
how so? I thought it was like perfectly well told.
Well, just at the beginning, like Rex is kind of like, he seems to be grappling with a little bit more PTSD, and maybe that's just because he is back on the ship and back on a Clone Wars era ship, and you know, that whole aspect to it. But like the second he lands, like he doesn't remember where he is or what to call Kanan, where we get the impression up until this point that Rex has kind of figured all his shit out. But sort of this brings it back in like, oh, Rex, you know, there's still, Kanan has a great line.
Rex has been through a lot. Battles leave scars. Some you can't see.
So that, I guess, kind of informed me a bit more about Rex. So.
Yeah, I don't think there was anything like mischaracterized about it. I think that's just like we don't have PTSD really, so I think that's just the way PTSD like usually works. Is like something, whether it be visual or something someone says, will trigger something, and then they'll be lost in thought for a few moments.
Right, for sure. It's just we're 3 seasons in and we haven't seen it yet, so it's just kind of like one of those things. But of course, it makes sense in this Clone Wars episode, Clone Wars focused episode. I obviously very much liked what they did, and it 100% makes sense, and it's what made the story really work and made it interesting to bring Rex into the story. Obviously, Rex is going through PTSD in this episode, but Kanan is also a survivor of the Clone Wars, and they've had a rocky relationship up until this point. And I really liked how they handled their relationship in this, which was that they've sort of gone past that, like definitively, where we're before like, have they settled their beef? Have they settled their beef? At this point, like Kanan is like, got it down. Like, and Kanan is really good at empathizing with Rex.
Yeah, and I love how Kanan is like a safe space essentially for Rex. Like we see it a little bit where Rex wakes up and he's like, oh no, the war's like, I'm back in the war. Cody, what's wrong? And then he sees Kanan and he's like, oh, I'm with Kanan. It's okay.
Yeah. I really liked all the moments between them. But yeah, the big contrast is that Rex is sort of... Okay, so Rex is this decommissioned clone who, survived the Clone War, went through some really traumatic stuff, and basically reprogrammed himself when he took out that chip and said, I will not go through Order 66. Like, I'm going to splinter off and live the rest of my life in isolation. Now he's back into the fold. Now he's in the Rebel Alliance. And then across from him, we have this droid character who I loved. And it's actually the same droid from the Onderon Saw Gerrera arc in Clone Wars.
Oh. Doesn't he, kill the president or something?
What about...
He has his whole own thing, and, Ezra even draws, it's an important thing, probably the theme of the episode is that they're, both, programmed to want to finish the battle, but, they can't because the end of the war was sort of stolen from them by the, Darth Sidious in the grand scheme of things.
It's almost like survival of the fittest. Rex and his mates were, the most intelligent. They saw, what was coming, so they decided to pluck out their chips. This guy was a smart droid, so he decided to not follow Order 66 and shut down.
Yeah, I thought that was also great, a great little detail, and it makes total sense. So this super tactical droid that's trained to be the ultimate military mind and strategist gets the order to shut down, and he's like, no, we wouldn't do that. That makes no sense. The war's still going on. We still have the greater numbers. This is a trick. Which, at a very literal level, it was. I mean, Darth Sidious was behind the whole thing the whole time, so he's just
he was probably it's a Republic trick.
Yeah, he says it's a Republic trick, but it's honestly both. It's because he was playing both sides. So, but yeah, he just says no, and he just turns it off, and so that's how they have survived. And I loved it. I mean, I said it again. I loved the battle droids in Clone Wars,
and we keep talking about it, but I just love the idea of independent droids. I want to because this is just one group. I want to know if there's if there's more groups on different planets that are remnants of the separatist faction that are just casually keeping up routine waiting for someone to come on. I want to see more stories about that. That's a really cool idea.
Yeah, I agree, and I thought they were used really well here. I mean, honestly, I think when this episode came out, it was one of the first ones where I was I would like to see more of this, and I really want to see more of General Kalani and his little battle droids. I'll just say now...
When they escaped, I was so happy.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, it's just a little part of the world just lives on, just to know that there are more battle droids out there, and they're out there doing their own thing.
Because when you think about, the prequel era, it's oh, that's from the past. We don't talk about that. That was a wartime. The droids are all gone now. The clones are all gone now. It's all history. But now the fact that it's still living on is it gives me comfort as a invested viewer.
There are probably more droids out there than there are clones, because the clones are gonna sort of age out and die, but that's droids are will be around for a long time. Battle droids by themselves aren't interesting. You have to have I think they're funny.
You have to put them in interesting scenarios. Make them R2-D2's battle guards.
Yeah, exactly. Or General Kalani in this instance, he's what makes the battle droids more fun, is that we've have this actual smart person commanding these droids, but he himself is a droid.
I laughed so hard when the general was I accept your logic. And then right after the battle droid said, sorry, pointing a gun to Zeb's head.
Because they're not enemies anymore. Right. Yeah. And I think it's just also, we talked about it through a lot of the Clone Wars. The Separatists had a lot of legitimate reason to be, upset with the Republic.
General, what were the Separatists fighting for?
According to my programming, freedom from the tyranny of the Republic.
Fighting tyranny. Sounds like the Empire has always been your enemy.
You are against the Empire. I am against the Republic. Now, the Republic has become the Empire.
While characters like General Grievous or Count Dooku did not have the goodwill of those people at heart, to see the droids of all people sort of humanized and become the leaders of their own destiny in this, it was cool. Because, at the end of the day, to see the clones and the droids go up against the Empire together was really cool.
Definitely. And that's definitely what you would call fan service, without a doubt.
Yeah, definitely. It didn't have to happen. They didn't need to do this. the wider Star Wars story has moved on from the battle droids. But, some people want more. I would like more, and I got it. And I guess what? I liked it. I thought it was really good. It was a really good episode.
And it definitely makes tonal, thematic sense for Rex's character. But it also just makes thematic sense for, the Star Wars fandom in general. Clone Wars get canceled, and then we're going to make a new show. What should we do? How about we have one episode dedicated just for the people who are Clone Wars fans and didn't get the ending that they wanted, so we can have, an official ending, even though it's not the one that we were hoping to see. It's something to latch on
and they
to.
got lucky that, after they made this, they're still going to actually get to have their ending. So that's great. I remember when watching this episode and the droidicas roll out and just getting the real joy and then thinking wow, I haven't been this excited to see droidicas roll out since watching The Phantom Menace on VHS at 6 years old.
I want droidicas up here at once.
It was that level of the boys are here. So that was great. I mean, it was definitely something that the whole episode was something that prequel fans and Clone Wars fans, I think, have been wanting to see for a long time.
Yeah, and also at the same time, it manages to not feel high stakes while also just feeling very wholesome and endearing. I never thought for a second Rex or Kanan or Ezra were in any kind of mortified, deadly danger, but it still was very fun. Ezra even treats the whole thing like a game, and I'm because even though it is a game almost, it still means so much personally to the droid and to Rex. I love that line where Kanan's explaining to Ezra about why Rex is being so strict and disciplinary.
A good soldier follows orders. That plan was based on timing and execution, and you took too long.
But Chopper wanted to show me.
This is not a game. This is life and death. Every move you make affects the rest of us. If we're gonna survive this, we're gonna do it with strategy and discipline.
It's not you. He needs to finish this battle his way.
Just like that droid.
The thing that always brings me really close to tears in this episode is just Rex thanking Ezra for ending the Clone War. Basically everything that Rex has been going through for the past presumably 20 years of his life having problems with.
I feel like Jessica would probably say that this whole thing, it's like a role play, group therapy is basically what it is. It's
yeah,
and you even said Ezra's just playing along for fun. It's just okay, and Rex intellectually has accepted that the Clone Wars is done. But in terms of the trauma that he's still processing, or not just living through it, because he's been with it for 30 years. I mean, it's not gonna just poof, it's gone. But there's still something there, and the act of playing it out and doing it all again is what helps them to sort of move past that. I guess through the rest of the show, I'm sure it's always something that Rex will carry with him, and also he specifically mentions Cody, who was his opposite, basically.
It's his right-hand man.
Yeah, it was Rex was Anakin's number one, and Cody was Obi-Wan's number one. And we don't know what happened to Cody. We know he went through Order 66. He's in Revenge of the Sith.
Well, we know he still had his chip, so presumably they either just wiped him away, or he's just living somewhere.
Yeah,
functionally working for the Empire.
Yeah, so just basically what I was trying to get as the end of this episode, is there anything left for Rex to still go through? I mean, I guess Ahsoka's gone, and that might be another reason why the sort of post-traumatic stress has sort of more affected him as we see it here than we have previously, because we haven't caught up with him this season. And beyond, the very emotional look he gives in the season 2 finale, that's another person from his past. And, as a clone, you have relationships with your fellow clones, and then you have relationships with a very small group of people. And in this case, that was the Jedi. Anakin, Ahsoka, Obi-Wan. Anakin's gone. Obi-Wan's gone. He thought he got Ahsoka back. Ahsoka is gone again. So once again, that sort of tie has been cut for him. So I'm really curious. I would love to see more Rex stories. I think we can definitely get a lot more from him. But it seems like, for the most part, Rex has managed to figure something out in this episode that has made him more confident and more
at
able
peace.
And more at peace, yeah.
I guess in summation, this is something that I don't say a lot, or maybe I do and I don't realize it, but I feel like I should say it a lot. I feel like this like specific batch of episodes is like a perfect little mixed bag to like show someone who hadn't seen Rebels before.
Yeah, all of these,
because it all like hits different specific like spots and like the Star Wars, like what Star Wars can do for you. It's like,
yeah,
it serves multiple functions.
Yeah, but all three of these were like definitely sort of more serialized, but they also managed to like do a lot and at a couple points really tie into the main Star Wars story. So this was definitely a really strong group of episodes. I thought they were all great.
And just please, please, please just watch Star Wars Rebels because it's more integral than you think. Like there's so many people who like think like the Clone Wars are like the thing to go to because it's like the Clone Wars, it's part of it's like says war in the title. It's probably more important to Star Wars, but Rebels is like, if not more, just as efficient or just as important to the story.
3 more episodes down. Next week, 3 more to go. You will need to have watched Season 3, Episode 7, Imperial Super Commandos, then Iron Squadron, and then the Winkathu Job. We're getting there.
I'm looking forward to all 3 of those. What was the first one?
Imperial Super Commandos. That one's a Mandalore one.
Yeah, I know that. And then Iron Squadron is a fan favorite.
Yep, can't wait.
And then what is it? The Wakandu?
Wakanda Job. The Winkathu Job. I know Hondo's in that one, but I don't remember what happens.
I just read up on it today because I was looking at Gary Whitta's page and he wrote that one too. So I'm anticipating that.
My name's Yates.
My name is Keats.
And hopefully Jordan and Jessica will be back for the next episode. May the Force be with you.